The American Red Cross's domestic anticipatory action approach aims to mitigate disaster impacts before they fully materialize through three interconnected pillars: operational readiness, forecasting and planning, and dynamic financing. The first pillar of operational readiness establishes a foundation for action in the anticipation window and effective early response inside the organization. We use national readiness targets, which are set every year based on estimated service delivery needs per geographic region. Benchmarks are set for how many trained personnel will be needed, maintenance for infrastructure, disaster response supplies necessary to have on hand, and community relationships through updated agreements with disaster response partners. The targets help each geographic area assess their capacity to respond locally to a disaster until more support can be provided from the national organization. We use local to national training and recruitment regimens to build the capacity of our personnel. Geographic regions have specialized staff, both paid employee and volunteer, to manage volunteer recruitment, onboarding, training, deployment, and post-deployment support. Regions have annual goals around volunteer recruitment and training to help build their local disaster response capacity. Importantly, we consistently maintain our data management system, RC Care. RC Care is integrated with financial service providers so that beneficiaries can elect to receive their assistance immediately in the way that suits them best. We run a supportive communities readiness program that formalizes planning with our partners in local government. This helps to anticipate resource requirements and identify constraints ahead of a disaster response. And finally, we have a national support plan that guarantees our teams can sustainably escalate a local operation into a national one should the scope or scale of the disaster increase. The national organization is responsible for providing resources on scene within an agreed timescale, utilizing strategic supplies in warehouse hubs, and recruiting personnel from across the country when needed. The second pillar of our approach to anticipatory action is forecasting and planning. We strive to predict disaster impacts through prediction models that look at a hurricane's landfall probability using historical data and population vulnerability maps. These models, developed and used by a national planning team, help to determine the potential scale of the disaster response, and therefore the timeline of actions to take ahead of landfall. For example, a hurricane with predicted large-scale damage will require more personnel to move on site earlier to meet service delivery needs. We have standard mass care planning assumptions for staff and resources we will require based on the predicted impact on the population. Depending on the forecast, emergency shelter sites may be put on standby with pre-positioned supplies so that service delivery can begin as soon as evacuees arrive. We rely on expert decision-making from trained senior leadership and a notification process from the field to inform when to activate each mechanism in our response structure. Decision-making to initiate a disaster response can be either top-down based on date or ground-up rooted in small-scale disasters that begin to increase in intensity. Finally, our third pillar, dynamic financing, enables us to fund anticipatory action successfully. We built a finance structure that includes a 7-level classification system of how much an operation is projected to cost. This allows us to structure our annual plans based on how many disasters we expect, large and small, and then budget accordingly for the year. We want to make sure funding is not a barrier to action when a forecast arises. We also conduct pre-impact resource allocation so that supplies are prepositioned ahead of impact. Based on our mass care planning assumptions, the organization can move resources like shelter support trailers to where they will be needed most. And finally, we make sure that we can flexibly assign responders to an operation even before there are account codes to charge them to. Responders are put on standby through an internal assignment system, which allows them to be quickly activated and deployed as soon as the disaster response financial account is open. This 3-pillar approach transforms our traditional response to disaster by prioritizing readiness, planning, and flexible financing to reduce reaction times and optimize resources. Through systematic analysis and coordinated decision-making, the American Red Cross demonstrates its commitment to anticipatory action to ensure we complete our mission and mitigate the negative impacts of disaster.